Good morning. It's April 26, 2022. Welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. This is the Western Standard's daily live show. We run Monday to Friday, 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard until about 1 o'clock usually. Being live, we get the commenters. I see Brad commenting already, saying it's another beautiful day in Alberta. It is indeed. We seem to finally have some spring hitting. I think Saskatchewan and Manitoba are still getting pretty beat up, but we're doing pretty good around here. I'll take it. My bees, I've gotten into beekeeping this year, have been delayed by another month, so I won't be able to show off all the stings and perhaps videos of me running around screaming like a little girl when I screw up. But it's something you can look forward to as things get warmer. It's also apparently International Flamingo Day, for those who were wondering. There's a title for everything. Every day has got to mean something, apparently, and that one is coming. So I just would not want you guys to get through the day without knowing that is going on. See, this is an important, informative show. So, yes, keep those comments going. I see lots of you there. Gary, Curly May, nice. From Ontario, Mike Kennelly, Pat, all of you guys. It's good to see you on there in the live scroll. I like to encourage that Discord. I've seen some great commentary going on in the comments scroll, and I've gotten some great questions, ideas, all sorts of stuff from you. So keep it coming, guys. It's a great week for free speech, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And the speech can happen in here. Again, though, let's just... try and keep it civil, somewhat. We can be angry, we can differ, we can get crabby. I do it all the time. But you can still be respectful to a degree, and that's important. I got a couple of good guests on today. Marcel Latouche is going to be talking about general government accountability. I've had him on before. He often speaks to municipal issues. People in Calgary are very familiar with him. He used to be on Danielle Smith's show all the time when she was on the radio. And he's written a number of books, and he's very good to talk about those things. I particularly want to start off with, apparently, our prime minister doesn't even get criminally charged when he commits crimes. Talk about a level of accountability that is lacking in a really big way. So, Mr. Latouche, I'm certain will have lots to add on that. And I'm going to have Kelly Malmberg on. He's an agricultural producer, or farmer, as you would say, just down south of Calgary there. We're going to talk about agricultural issues because we're getting into the spring planting season, and we've got a lot of, farmers, it's not an easy biz at the best of times. And we've got some challenges coming from our government, as usual, against that, it seems. They've moved their climate thing, their obsession and emissions reduction away from oil and gas. I mean, it's still there, but now they're setting their targets on farmers and going after their fertilizer. I'm sure there's other things I could talk to Kelly about, but I'd really like to get his thoughts on that. Of course, top of the news right now, though, is Elon Musk has, so far it's not 100% cleared. I know I'm getting all the pedantic people on Twitter saying it's not done yet. Well, it's pretty damn near done, guys. He's purchased Twitter, and it's got the progressives going bananas, and I love it. This guy is just an amazing disruptor, if nothing else, whether you like him or dislike him. He sure sets things up. So why are they going so nuts, though? Well, let's go into a bit of it. Now, Twitter has about 339 million daily users, and that's a large number, but it's actually dwarfed by a number of social media platforms. Like Facebook has over 2 billion users. Instagram has 1 billion. Even TikTok has more than Twitter, and I don't even really fully understand TikTok, but they got 650 million followers. Less than a quarter of North Americans use Twitter daily. So, I mean, if it's a smaller social media outlet, why are the progressives losing their collective minds so badly over Elon Musk's purchase of the platform? Well, it's not so much how many people use Twitter as who uses Twitter. Most typical citizens, obviously 3/4 of them and more, don't use Twitter at all. Pretty much every politician, media member, and celebrity does. Twitter punches above its weight in influence among media and policymakers. So, while political discourse can be found on any social media platform, Twitter by far was the most political in nature. Now, it becomes inevitable whenever something becomes politically influential that the politically unprincipled will, of course, want to control it. The ownership and prior management of Twitter began with a somewhat left lean, and they continued an evolution towards a sharp left leaning. The editorial leaning of Twitter went from subtle manipulation of content through methods such as shadow banning to being overtly left-leaning and banishing even moderately conservative parody news sites like the Babylon Bee. Shadow banning, for those not familiar with it, is an odious practice where Twitter will throttle the reach of influential conservative voices without actually banning them. Tweets from these people won't reach the scrolls their followers and won't be widely shared. So it gives the illusion that the platform allows for open speech, but these voices are actually being suppressed. There was no veneer of balance, any longer. Twitter's become an influential platform dominated by leftists, and conservative voices were becoming stifled constantly, if not banned altogether, from the platform for the most minor of apparent transgressions. Elon Musk, he's an erratic and interesting character, to say the least. There really hasn't been any indication of some sort of hard-right inclinations on his part historically, though, and I doubt he leans that way. He is, though, a self-described free speech absolutist, so I can understand how he'd be annoyed in seeing an influential social media platform stepping on open discourse so blatantly. Now, there's millions of free speech absolutists in the world, but of course, Musk happens to be the richest man on the planet while he's at it. So rather than sitting back and being annoyed like the rest of us had to, Musk decided to do something about it and bought Twitter. Now, Musk has been launching idea balloons for weeks about what he may do with Twitter, but he hasn't committed to anything solid yet at this point of his purchase. It's only been a day after all. It can be safely assumed, though, that Musk is going to be acting quickly to take the restraints upon discourse from Twitter as one of his first courses of action. I mean, this was a big move. He's not just going to buy it and sit on it and do nothing. Now, the response to that from many leftists, it's been nothing less than hysteric. The usual accusations have already begun, accusing Musk of being a white supremacist. Of course, there's utterly no evidence of this. Those guys, their playbook is so thin, it's almost microscopic. Others are claiming the world is going to descend into total chaos and Nazis will surely become a dominant political world force. I wish I was exaggerating the rhetoric. The left really they're getting totally unhinged. And they must have a really ugly worldview if they really believe that there's a massive world population of Nazis and white nationalists who are only being kept in check through control and manipulation of social media platforms. Now, many people have already decried Twitter as being something of a cesspool of political discourse, and there's some truth to that. Twitter's loaded with anonymous troll accounts bent on nothing more than attacking other users and being offensive without purpose. The thing is, though, it is and always was easy to block these accounts. It only takes a second. The problem, though, is blocking takes a tiny measure of effort and personal responsibility, and both of those principles are things that run contrary to the basis of progressivism, especially personal responsibility. More things that can be done to improve the Twitter experience, though, and Musk has hinted at some of them. I mean, no troll is more bold or annoying than one who can wrap themselves in the cloak of confident anonymity. The worst of accounts are almost always anonymous. When a person has to attach their name to something, it's amazing how much more thoughtful and respectful their discourse often suddenly becomes. Musk isn't talking about eliminating the ability to be anonymous, but he's spoken of creating ways for users to verify their identities online. Right now, the only people who have any form of verification of identities that the platform considers to be are ones that the platform considers to be people of public interest. The process for gaining that status is arbitrary and nebulous. Nobody's quite sure who qualifies for and can gain the precious Twitter blue checkmark. Not everybody who has such verification is necessarily nice or polite. I think I'm an example of that, but they're trackable at least. Now, a system can and should be created where a person can choose to verify their identity while keeping their public identity private. This would stop the spawning of multiple accounts and add a layer of accountability. And there's good reasons why some people may choose to remain anonymous, and we don't want to lose all those voices. Maybe a different colored checkmark could be applied to accounts. I'd be more inclined, though, I can say, to take tweets more seriously from an account that had verified itself than one that was created with no verification, even if it remained anonymous. So Musk has talked about also flushing the bots and fake accounts from the system as well. And that's easier said than done, but if he can find a good way to do it, it would certainly help clean up the platform. There's lots of other things that can be done to improve Twitter, and I hope Musk succeeds in doing them. Twitter is a valuable platform for discourse and amplifying issues. It morphed into a left-wing echo chamber with no regard or respect for free speech. The only way to maintain balance is to open speech up. I don't want to see a conservative echo chamber either. I mean, that's what happened with Gab and Parler. They just didn't quite take off because they were so dominated by conservatives. So it looks like Musk is going to do that. He's going to open speech up altogether and let the chips fall where they will. Time's going to tell if Musk's move is going to improve the platform. In the meantime, I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes. I mean, I'm really enjoying watching the progressives holding a public temper tantrum over the very concept of free speech. They're exposing themselves for the insecure authoritarians that they are. I mean, if their case is that strong, they shouldn't need to suppress the speech of others in order to make it. Perhaps progressives will pool their own money and buy their own platform. There's nothing stopping them from creating the little echo chamber they desire. But who am I kidding? They only know how to spend other people's money. So the left's next move is going to be to push further to have government controlling speech on all those platforms. And let's hope that Elon Musk plans to push back against that too. There's no such thing as democracy without free speech, and I only wish that leftists would learn this lesson. That's what's got me going today. As I said, it's kind of a positive thing, and I'm just dancing on the grave of the leftist echo chamber that used to be Twitter. Now, let's check in with our news editor, Dave Naylor from the newsroom. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Good, Cory. How are you?
I'm pretty good, actually.
Good. I hear there's been some twists and turns in the tale of Duke the Wonder Dog.
Yes, Duke the Wonder Dog looks like he's going to become a permanent resident of the Morgan household in Pritis. We're not terribly sad about that development. We'd hope to find him his forever home somewhere else as we were fosters and we could keep turning over more dogs and having him in. But Duke just doesn't seem to be settling in anywhere else, so I guess he's going to have to stay with us and become a Morgan. But it's not such a bad outcome.
You're just a big softy, Cory. Anyways, making news this morning. Top of our website at the moment is Tamara Litch. You remember she was one of the organizers of the Truckers' Freedom Convoy. Ended up being thrown in jail. Spent a couple of weeks behind bars before getting bail. She's been awarded the JCCF's George Jonas Award. Goes to a freedom fighter every year. She's set to be given the award in Toronto in June. But a bit of a problem there, Cory, because her bail conditions say she's not allowed in Ontario. So maybe they'll have to do a presentation here or figure something out. Conservative leadership candidate Jean Charest this morning revealed his climate change plan. Says he would scrap the current Liberal carbon tax, which he says penalizes families, and instead bring in a more of a large emitter tax. So still lots of questions that need to be answered there. Our Christopher Olcorn has discovered a story out of the University of Waterloo. They are looking for a tenured professor position in research. You and I cannot apply, though, Cory. No, in fact, no men can apply. The university says it's limited to transgendered, non-binary people and women. So males need not apply for that position.
Isn't the bar said it's self-identification, though? I mean, I could just identify as whatever the hell I want while I fill it out, and we'll deal with what I identify once I'm in.
Exactly. You would think they might want to do some investigating into the people that they that apply for it. I mean, there have been a few cases in Canada of Indigenous professors who have been found to be basically frauds. So, interesting times. Christopher's also got a story on COVID booster shots, the fourth shots, now available to people in Saskatchewan over 50. We've got a 2-year anniversary story our Arthur Green has done in northern Alberta, second anniversary of those terrible Fort McMurray floods. And he is speaking to the riding MLA, Brian Jean. Chris has got a story on Saskatchewan toughening up their human trafficking laws, talking to the justice minister there. Interesting story out of Ottawa, even though Dr. Theresa Tam at the time said they were doing everything as quickly as they possibly could to get COVID testing kits out. 6 months, Cory, it took 6 months before the first unit was sent out. And our Mike Thomas, our real estate guy, has a look at a RBC report showing mortgages are heading up. And obviously that's of no great surprise to a lot of people as the Bank of Canada continues to hike their rates by 0.5 percentage point at a time. So that's what's on there at the moment. Our political columnist Linda Slobodian is working on a couple of good ones. Just about to publish one on the fact that there's half a dozen or so Kenney-allied UCP MLAs who aren't facing any nomination challenges at all in their ridings. This is coming after there was some controversy in Rimbey Rocky Mountain House area over Tim Hovan and challenging Jason Nixon, and down in Cardston, Siksika. So she says it's not a great surprise because people see the trouble they have to go through in trying to deal with the UCP. She's also got an upcoming column on Airdrie. UCP MLA Peter Guthrie has launched an astonishing withering attack on Jason Kenney's office staff and some of their actions on social media the last little while. So a couple of interesting pieces to come from Linda, Cory.
Oh, great. Yeah, Linda always digs into the interesting stuff out there. So lots to look forward to. Good, bad, and indifferent. We report it all anyways.
You bet.
All right. Well, thanks for checking in today, Dave, and we will see you after the show then.
All right, give Duke a pet for me.
I will. Yes, Duke, he is a big, goofy galoot, but he'll fit into my house well enough, I'm certain. Jane and I'll take good care of him. Put that plug out for people. There's an overload of foster dogs, dogs that need fosters out there, actually, from a number of rescue societies. We had a lot of irresponsible people taking in pets during the pandemic, and then, of course, now it's become inconvenient for them, so they're surrendering them to rescue places. So, hey, you know what? If you're interested at all in that sort of thing, reach out to me. Send me an email. We could talk about that because we do need people to really help out in that backlog of dogs. There's a whole lot of them stuck in kennels right now, just looking for someone at least to hang on to them until they find an adoptee. Here's my self-serving charity plug for the day. Now let's talk about some of the other stuff. So I should remind everybody, and actually I'll start, though I got to do that, with letting them know. I mean, as you can see, Dave was listing a whole pile of news stories. We got all sorts of stuff coming out, opinion stuff, news stuff, videos, and all of that. And we can't do it without you guys and your subscriptions. You've been doing fantastic. We're just gaining subscribers like nobody's business. People understand and they're valuing what they're getting out of us. That they realize that, hey, for $10 a month, this is a good deal. This supports independent media. This is how we can get good, solid journalism to us. So if you haven't already subscribed, please do. This is how we can keep doing it. We can keep getting more reporters, columnists, doing more shows and doing this. It's $10 a month, $99 for a year. Hey, you get $10 more off if you use the coupon code TRIGGERED. Get on there, take out a subscription, help support independent media. It's important for all of us. It really is. And again, I really do appreciate those who have subscribed already. So I'm going to speak to one of our sponsors. I see Marcel in the lobby already, so I'm going to talk about that too, because the other thing that helps us pay the bills and is very important are our sponsors, and a big one has been Bitcoin Well. So if you're interested in digital currencies, you're curious about digital currencies, I mean, for a lot of us, it's new, it's nebulous, it's complicated. Check out bitcoinwell.com. They're an Alberta company. You can talk with a person one-on-one. They have white glove service. This is how you can comfortably investigate and see if digital currencies are for you. Because, I mean, there's a million online resources, but are they all trustworthy? Do you know if you can get good advice from them? Would they be able to walk you through it? That's what Bitcoin Well is all about. They're building a relationship, helping you get into the digital currency world, and they lay it out about what it's all about. I mean, how do you get your ledger set up? What's a hot wallet? What's a cold wallet? I mean, is it for you? It's not necessarily for everybody. That's what they're there for. Check them out. A good local company, bitcoinwell.com. They're a great sponsor, and they're providing a great service. Okay, let's get on to our first guest. I want to talk about accountability, a big loaded word on a giant issue, on something that is just lacking so much and too much all over at every level of government. Let's bring in Marcel Latouche. He's been on the show before. Hey, Marcel, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, Cory. I finally decided to retire from the Institute. Everything has gone by very smoothly. We've been doing this for some 20 years now, but it's time for me to retire. However, I think there are a number of people nowadays who can take the mantle. I mean, there's Franco from the CTF and Peter McCaffrey from Common Sense, and William Macbeth from North, and so on and so forth. There are some very good young people to take my place. However, I'm still going to contribute to people like you, the Western Standard, either by writing columns, or if you decide to invite me, I'll be happy to be contributing as a private citizen.
Right on. Well, I do appreciate that. I mean, once we've got it in the system, we can retire from the formal groups and organizations we're with, but it's still in our blood. We're still going to watch the politics happening and still going to have our views that we want to share. So I appreciate getting you on to continue talking about it.
Cory, you're one of those who are going to take the mantle to move this country forward. And I am very, very happy to have connected with you over the years. And we've done some great work together. And I hope this continues from your side. Let me say, government accountability is still my bailiwick. I still will talk about it. I still have thoughts about it. especially in those times where every level of government is having a problem today. My view is that we have too many politicians who tell you about their principles before the election. Once, as soon as they get elected, all those principles they embrace disappear, because what they want to do nowadays is to look at the next election and how they are going to get re-elected. I mean, I'm not going to be talking about individuals, but every single level has shown that we have a problem. Calgary's municipality, it has already started. Gondek doesn't like somebody on council, so let's shut his mic off. At the provincial level in Alberta, we have many problems. Not all of Kenny's doing. There are certain things that have happened in the economy and in the geopolitical arena that have affected his government. However, he is in charge and the buck stops with him. At the federal level, accountability has disappeared completely. Now that we have the coalition between the NDP and the Liberal, we have a one socialist government. Accountability has disappeared in this country at every single level. And younger people should be very, very worried about this. Because unlike the United States, where they have a balance of power every 2 years, where they can have a midterm where things can shift. In Canada, we don't have this system. We have somebody who's been elected in Ottawa now for years, and it just continues. We can no longer accept accountability from the government if there is no transparency. I mean, too often we have fractured political parties at every level right now. We see a number of people entering the fray for leadership or for candidacy who have no idea but one thing. In my point of view, they have only one thing in mind, is their selfish position in the years to come once they get elected. And this is very, very dangerous for a nation which is struggling to find its position on the global arena today. Because with Trudeau, Canada is no longer respected like it used to be as a honest broker. How can we be a honest broker when we cozy up with China? I mean, we can't do this. The economy of this country is going to the dogs because of the inability for this government to see that we cannot continue to spend at the level that he has been doing for the past 6 years. And we have no way to get out of it.
Well, and that gets back to like the whole thing, and on every level is the accountability between elections. And, you know, one of the areas that this is part of why I wanted to bring you on was something that got revealed recently in a story. As at the highest level, I mean, we'd still think that politicians would be held accountable should they breach the law. And we found out that RCMP had considered investigating and laying charges on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau over the Aga Khan affair. It did sound like he had broken the law, but they felt somehow that it wasn't in the national interest to follow through on charges on the Prime Minister in that case, so they didn't do it. Like, that's very scary. That's a police force, a national police force, saying that we will not charge people of a certain caliber and level in society, whereas we would charge others. I mean, if we don't even have the criminal justice form of accountability in this country, what have we got?
And this is where the problem is, because a lot of the situation we have at the federal government is because our judicial system has disappeared in its true role of holding politicians accountable. Many of the decisions being taken under the charter of this country is now mostly political as opposed to be judicial. Today, I see that Trudeau has appointed somebody who used to be a contributor to the Liberal Party as the person who is going to investigate his role in the Emergencies Act. How accountable are we going to have this government held to when we have this kind of situation? We appoint people who have been contributors to our political agenda, and then we ask them to review our actions. We are in a very, very dangerous situation.
So what are some solutions we can do, though, to bring government into accountability? Like even, and a lot of people are frustrated with the UCP. They're on both sides. But I mean, one of the areas I've kind of said is, well, join a party, get involved, and perhaps you can have some influence from within. But as we see with the UCP, they're fighting like cats and dogs from within too. And I think more and more citizens are just throwing up their hands, and that leads to even less accountability. Like, how do we solve this problem? That's the hard.
Well, the first thing is conservatives have got to stop being so afraid of stating that they are conservatives. They've got to stop saying that we have principles, but once elected, we don't apply those principles. We are too timid. Our politicians are being too timid in their application of their roles. And we've got to ask them to be accountable. Now, people talk about recalls and so on and so forth. It's costly. What we've got to do is, I believe, limited terms in elections and electoral process in this country. We can no longer have this kind of rolling years after years of the same people going in there. I mean, the United States has a president for 8 years maximum, and he's gone. We have Trudeau now for too long, and we cannot do anything about it. At the provincial level, it's the same thing. We must have a system which is very equivalent to either a midterms, like they have in the United States, a rotation every 2 years out of a 4-year term, or we have limited terms for our leaders. People continuously tell me, oh, Marcel, we can't do this because, people are not going to put their names out there because they are not committed for 8 years. Well, if you really are committed to this, to providing a service, to responding to the electorate's desires, you should be able to do it in 8 years. If you can't do it, why are you still there? That's one way to bring accountability. You reverse the role. It's not them making the rules, but you ask the people to tell you what you want. People are talking about Poilievre now as the front runner in the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. And the left, of course, are branding him as a populist. But they forget, what is a populist? A populist is somebody who lives and the electorate. That's what populism is about. And if you don't have politicians listening to the electorate, you don't have accountability.
Yeah, well, it's almost, it's so insulting when they spit out populism as if it's a bad term. Populism means they're reading the crowd and they're reflecting it rather than directing it. I mean, it's the very basis of democracy. And when we see the people in power chafing under the whole concept of democracy happening, that's a dangerous approach for them to take.
Oh, absolutely. And this is what we are getting nowadays more and more. And if you get social media censoring what you are supposed to be saying, we are losing the value, the democratic value of the freedom of speech. And what is happening is we are continuously seeing government trying to censor people through the use of giving money or allowing social media to control the censorship system. It is good now that Musk has taken over Twitter. We shall see how this works out. But I really like the fact that people are beginning to look at the liberal mass media and how they are reacting to this takeover of Twitter. I mean, he's branded as, oh, he's a dictator. He's not going to like freedom of speech and so on and so forth. Have you noticed that for the past 6 years, well, no, I'd say a bit more than that, a decade or so, the left has been the ones who define what freedom of speech is supposed to be. And in their view, freedom of speech is that only their views is acceptable. And that is another kick in the pants of accountability.
Well, and that's one of the things that's interesting is that if a person is unapologetically conservative, and nobody seems to have tried that in quite some time, it seems to be well received by a lot of people. That's what has a lot of them afraid right now. We have Pierre Poilievre really taking Canada by storm right now in a lot of ways, big rallies, and it really isn't that secret a formula. He's speaking pure, straightforward talking points from conservative philosophy. But of course, they're turning around, they're labeling him as an extremist, as a populist. Even I've seen, the Nazi, the white supremacist. It gets tiresome when they throw that out, but it's effective too, unfortunately.
But that's the only way that the left can answer to any attempt to challenge them. Everybody is labeled by the left as a misogynist, as a homophobic, and so on and so forth. That's their only defense in what they are proposing. The problem that we have today is that, as you say, Poilievre is running a campaign as an unapologetic conservative. That's what we need to see. We need to see this at every level of politics in Canada right now. I mean, it doesn't matter. To me, a democracy means that the public will be able to choose. The electorate will choose how they respond to the politician. But the politician who comes in must ensure that they give their true value and their true personality to the electorate to allow them to judge and inform themselves before they vote. The mass media is going to be the key to giving this information. Unfortunately, in Canada, we have so much sponsored government subsidies to the media that they've become so biased that we need people like you and independent media to be the informer of news and information to the general public.
So getting back to accountability, I guess, in legislative measures we could do, recall is something. I mean, is that a tool that's feasible? I mean, unfortunately, once somebody gets in, it's sort of the problem is people campaign conservative and then they govern left when they get in. We see that a lot municipally. And then with others, but there's not much we can do. And there's not an interest on the part of an elected official to give us good recall policy. As we saw with Premier Kenney, he put out a recall policy finally, but it's not really one that's viable or usable.
I have never been a proponent of recall.
Okay.
Because recall to me is a waste of money. So this is why I always say limited term. Because, the fact is a recall, you need to get a number of signatures and so on and so forth. Who are going to sign it are the same people who voted for the other candidate. And so therefore, what are you doing is you're getting a new election for nothing. I mean, recall to me is a misnomer. It has been bandied as a panacea for our problem. I prefer limited term. A 2-term limit of 4 years for every single position in politics, to me, is far more than enough. Then what you do is you sit out 1 term. After your 2 terms, you're allowed to sit out 1 term. And then what happens is you can come back again and be re-elected if you so wish. Or if you elect, it was a mistake and we want him back. But sit down for 1 term and see what happens.
Well,
a 2-term limit is the best thing for accountability.
Yeah, and it does, I guess, bring it about. I mean, the person has to go in with an idea of some sort of ideology of changes they want to make, things they want to do, rather than always worrying about re-election. I mean, if you know that 8 years is your maximum, you've already won your 4-year re-election, you're going to be theoretically, hopefully, sticking on principles and making political change rather than just worrying about keeping your seat longer.
Absolutely, because after in our system right now at all levels, it becomes pensionable time. They get those huge pensions. They get rewarded for doing nothing, for agreeing with everybody, for compromising. There's the problem here. In the system that we have nowadays, even principal politicians compromise to get re-elected because they're looking at a huge pension down the road after 10, 12, 15 years. It's no problem there. You have 8 years, you go, your pensions, because I think they deserve a pension. Don't get me wrong. I mean, after 8 years, so it'd be smaller. You go away. When you come back, you get another start again after the term that you sat away from politics. If you get re-elected, you start again. So your pension will be, 8 years and 8 years if you get back in. But not these long-term pensions of staying in there and action pay of saying, hey, I'm just going to be in there. I promised the electorate to do certain things, but now I compromise with my colleagues. What we do is we have to have bipartisanship in certain issues. There is no such thing about bipartisanship. Bipartisanship is the killer of accountability.
Yeah, well, and that's been an issue, I guess. I mean, it gets bigger. We're going to run out of time before we can get into it, but I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk again on it. Whipped votes, representative. I mean, having local representation versus just party representation is another area of dispute. I mean, a principal person, wouldn't be voting the same necessarily in a rural constituency as a person in an urban constituency because their constituents might have different needs. But with whipped votes,
absolutely,
we don't.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that's what's going to happen. I mean, if you have limited terms, people are going to be deciding every 8 years as a maximum on the role that the representative has done for them. Now, if the representative is good enough, he will mentor somebody to take his place with the same principles, with the same ideas. But don't tell me that there is nobody to take their places. That's untrue. Because every time you have an election, you get hundreds of people putting their name. The last municipal election, we had so many people who wanted to be mayor. I mean, it was a dog's breakfast.
Yeah. No, there's no shortage of applicants for the job. I guess the goal is just to try and get the best ones we can. And I mean, as you said, a pension is reasonable. It just has to be a reasonable level, and they should be paid fairly well. I mean, we got to get people from the business community and the trades and others that are, you're not going to draw them in if we're paying them in a minimum wage, but we don't want to overpay as well. That's always a balance we have to seek.
Well, absolutely. You can't tell people to do things for nothing. As long as it is a fair wage and they are respected and they deliver the services and how they treat their citizens. I mean, it's a fair wage. I have no problem with that at all.
Great. Well, thank you for coming in to check in today. As I said, it's a big subject. We only talked about a bit of it. I hope, we can talk again some more down the road as you're, I know it's going to be harder to corner you because the outdoor tennis and pickleball seasons are approaching, but I'm sure we can manage to pull you on some more in the future.
You can always contact me personally. I will contribute maybe a column for you guys down the road sometimes.
Excellent. Actually, I will reach out on that for sure. I'll send you an email.
About the equity and equality one. But I was really glad to see Mark Milke come back and talk about the same subject. And this is something that you should be watching very carefully because the social justice system is going to once again be a catalyst to overthrow accountability in government. And you should pursue that, and maybe we'll come back and talk about this down the road later.
Absolutely. Social justice, that's a whole ball of wax on its own and a whole new interview. We'll have to do that. All right. Well, thank you for joining me today, Marcel. It's good to see you, and I will send an email. We'll talk a bit after the show.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Right. I'll talk to you later. So that was Marcel Latouche. He's an author. There's a number of books. If you Google it, you can find his publications online, and he was with the Public Sector Institute for Public Sector Accountability, and he's retired from that, but he's still, as you can see, very active and a very dedicated man to accountability, just some political principle, those core things that we're just lacking so much on so many other levels right now. I noticed a couple of questions. I'll talk a little more about that. Some people are asking about Bitcoin and minimum purchases and things like that. I don't know the full details of that. I'm pretty certain there's no minimum purchase of 350. I saw somebody in the comment scroll saying that. But that's the point of that Bitcoin well. Just I'm not going to go into the whole ad here again, but check them out, go online, and they can really break down what those are and reach out to them. It's not just my plug for our sponsor, though, of course, I plugged them, but they are a resource to answer those questions better than I could as well. Like that's what they're all about is making you informed on how those things work. You know, one of the things I saw some discussion and one of the news items was the testing, and these delays on testing, and people are saying that scandalous, that the Dr. Tam and it took so long to get tests open. There's one of the things out of this whole pandemic I couldn't understand, and I still don't, is this obsession with testing. Like, okay, we got all these asymptomatic people. I mean, it's the next virtue signal. It's the next big thing is to show your positive test online. I mean, I always have to look twice. Is this a pregnancy test? Is that piss running down their fingers? No, it was a COVID test because they look very similar, but make sure not to pee on those. It's a different means of testing. Either way, I don't care. I really don't care. I mean, almost everybody has tested positive at one point or another. And what does it change? Usually they don't have any symptoms. If they do, they're minor, but it's not getting rid of the condition. It's not chasing it away. It's not making it stop. Crazy old Dr. Joe, an NDP Vipond, he put his test up the other day in a big diatribe. He even wears goggles everywhere he goes. He says he got it on a plane. He's confident of it. Of course, he was jet setting all over the place. He's a climate crusader who flies back and forth across the country all over the place, and then comes and talks to mainstream media as an expert in saving us all from ourselves through more lockdowns and personal restrictions on freedoms. He's nuts, but he gets all sorts of mainstream time, that guy. He's their medical expert. He's fixated on testing. I mean, he's done everything presumably right. He wears goggles even. He wears his scrubs everywhere he goes. He's something special, that guy. And he's still tested positive. Maybe we just have to let this thing run its course, eh? Crazy thought. And hey, I'm not going to go down the whole thing of whether vaccines are a good idea or a bad idea. I mean, I think they're good. I feel it should be a free choice thing, and I think it'll reduce your symptoms. But if you choose not to, so be it. But obviously, it doesn't stop the spread. It doesn't. Vipond did everything else, and it doesn't stop the spread. So, I mean, testing, if it's asymptomatic, I mean, again, where are you going with this? So we got to test ourselves daily to find out if we have it or not. Or if you do have symptoms, you know what? How about doing the common courtesy? You don't need a test. You're feeling sick, you're sneezing, you're snotting, you're coughing, stay home. Don't go spread it in your workplace. Even if it's not COVID, even if it's just the flu, don't spread it. Come on. It's just a good idea not to do. Wash your hands, these little things. We don't need restrictions on our personal freedoms in order to avoid a lot of these things, guys. We just need some common sense, which common sense isn't terribly common. I understand that. We got to keep pushing. So speaking of people admitting they're wrong, the governor of the Bank of Canada acknowledged missing repeated inflation targets, and he's warning that there's going to be higher interest rates coming soon. So he said, we got some things wrong. I mean, I don't know. I shouldn't always knock people in senior positions when they admit they're wrong. If they don't admit, then we just keep doing more. But this is what's going on. I mean, it's not like they weren't warned about the inflation. Why are these guys acting like it caught them off guard? It's economics 101 to know that when the government is spending and borrowing and the Bank of Canada is printing money like mad, you're going to get inflation. It happens. It's like predicting the sun's going to rise in the east, guys. So he's saying, did we get everything right? No, but we were surprised by the pervasiveness of supply constraints. Well, what did you think? You locked down the world. Of course there was inflation. Of course there are constraints in supply. These are the top people running this country. I tend to get very concerned about this. Now, they're talking about raising interest rates because that's the only way they seem to know how to get inflation in check. And it is a means of doing it. It'll slow down the economy. But that's the thing, is you slow the economy down too much, you're into recession. That's what we need right now, isn't it? Let's go into a recession. They're in a bad place. One of the things that doesn't seem to be crossing the government's mind is cutting the bloody spending, Just cut the damn spending. But they won't do that. And that will help bring inflation down. I mean, you might still have to raise some interest rates a bit. They're unusually low. But, as long as the government's pouring that money into the system, the currency is going to get devalued. And that gets a little bit back again to why you might want to examine digital currencies and things like that. Kate's saying just the flu is also a killer. Yes. And that's kind of what I was talking about before, actually. Just responding to a commenter. It's a good comment. Many people die of the flu. If you're vulnerable, if you're immune compromised, if you're a senior, the flu is very often what unfortunately is sort of the final usher to the door. I mean, there may be a whole pile of other conditions. You're very sick, and then that's what leads to pneumonia or whatnot, and you pass away. The flu should be taken seriously, and that's what I'm talking about. If a person's feeling sick and fevered and nasty in the morning, it doesn't matter. They shouldn't bother with a test. They know they're sick. Stay home. Just stay home. You don't need a COVID test to figure that out. Just don't go spread it. But no, we were fixated on these bloody tests, So yeah, back to that news earlier too. Speaking of accountability and things of concern, and Marcel brought it up, and Dave. So we've got an inquiry as to whether or not the use of emergency powers. I don't even like that term. It was martial law. Okay, it was martial law. It was a form of what used to be the War Measures Act. And I know it drives progressives nuts when I bring that up all the time. But that's what it was. They changed it into something else. They called it, the Emergencies Act, but it's the same thing. It was an act designed to say, we are going to suspend civil liberties in order to address an emergency or issue, whether it's aliens invading or a natural disaster or meteorites, or in this case, bouncy castles. And martial law, if you look it up, you look at the definition, it is the suspension of those civil rights. There's levels and levels of it. So certainly there wasn't the whole country loaded with people on street corners with guns, but they did have the ability now to arrest people without charge and hold them for extended periods of time. They had the ability to seize people's properties, their bank accounts. They had the ability to force labor. Again, not enough people are talking about that. I don't think they ever actually used it, but they could have taken tow truck drivers, others, and said, hey, by force of the law, you have to work for us. Whether you like it or not, you have to. You have no choice. That's scary. That's scary government power. That's forced labor. So we'd better examine and talk and look and see whether this was justified. I'm sure myself, and I know, but I'm sure most of the viewers on this kind of show agree it wasn't justified. But let's have an examination, because there is an obligation that was built into the law, at least. Whoever wrote that act realized that this is very serious and very important. I don't think whoever wrote that law figured that we'd have an imbecile of a prime minister who would implement it for bouncy castles, but they did. He did. So now let's look back on it. And unfortunately, the prime minister gets to pick who heads the inquiry. And it's a liberal appointed judge. Geez, who'd have thunk that, right? He was a partner in a law firm that included Pierre Trudeau. Yes, the probable daddy of Justin. And they're saying they're looking forward to this being a nice, unbiased examination. Who knows? Perhaps Justice Rouleau is still very principled and stuck on ideology and wants to dig into this and ensure that there is a follow-up. It's not impossible. But again, this guy's worked as a partner at a Montreal firm that also had associates. Yeah, Pierre Trudeau, Jean Chrétien, former MP and Liberal Party president, Don Johnston, and Roy Heenan. He's liberal to the core. So were we really supposed to believe that this guy is going to do an in-depth investigation as to what happened? And even if he does, none of us are going to believe it. This was, again, the word for the day, it's like if it was Sesame Street or the letter for the day or whatever. Accountability, that's the big one. And unfortunately in Canada, it is lacking. It is lacking terribly on every level. Okay, I'm going to shift a little, though, to still a big and important issue. I'm going to talk about a sponsor first before I bring Kelly in. He's in the lobby there. And that is the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Again, Tony Bernardo is fantastic. There's an interview I had with him at the gun show a couple of weeks ago in Calgary. If you go on YouTube, you can see that. And him and I chatted for a few minutes talking about what his organization does and what they're up to. You can see all these images that Nico's brought up on the screen. You can see it's all shooting sports, target shooting, whether it's cowboy action or black powder and all those things. It's a resource. If you are want to enjoy firearms in any sort of way, whether it's collecting them or shooting targets or whatever you want, it's your business. As long as you're legal about it, you're not hurting anybody. This is the place to find the resources, network with each other, see where there's events, things going on, videos on safe use. Plus, they have moves, they're lobbying on your behalf to make sure the Liberal government doesn't take away that ability, because they're always trying to take it away. It's always under threat. The Canadian Shooting Sports Association has done legal challenges on your behalf, but they need you in order to do it. Nothing's free, I'm afraid, guys, unless you're a socialist. Then it's free because you got to steal it from somebody else. Either way, you've got to stand up for yourself. Take out a membership with the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. If you enjoy firearms, I really can't stress this enough. It's very important. You have to stand up for your rights because nobody else is going to do it for you. These guys will do it on your behalf, but you still need to join. So check them out. Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Their site is cssa-cila.org. All right, let's get on to some agricultural issues. I'm going to bring in Kelly Malmberg. He's been on the show before, and spring's coming along. Once things get rolling, it gets hard to get anybody who works in the agricultural sector on because they're too damn busy. So I've managed to corner Kelly for a little bit here, and we can talk about some of these issues pressing. Hey, Kelly, how's it going?
Good, Cory.
Good to see you back. So I guess, the first thing, that's the last time we talked about it, really impacted producers out west. In general, was the lack of moisture, the drought. It's still looking pretty dry out there this year, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that was a weird storm, pretty well north of you guys. They got some huge snow there, 2 weeks ago? A couple of, guys, and out west, the Cochrane country, I think they had a couple weeks feet of snow. But once you get south of that Bow River, it petered out. I think we live just about 10, 12 miles south of the Bow there between Carsland and Calgary. And we got maybe an inch of snow, and then from then on, it just petered out. So yeah, we're really dry. It's the whole South Country's pretty dry.
There's not much we can do about that, but it's going to be one of the things impacting yields and crops. And we've got inflation is going rampant, particularly with food items. And we just got to make sure people understand this is the way the chain of supply comes, and there's the source. That's one of the pressures that's coming on. We've got a number of them. The Russia-Ukraine war, on international commodity prices, is having a very strong impact because they're, aside from Canada, among the lead grain producers in the world there too, right?
Yeah, like the Russians and the Ukraine. Ukraine's probably one of the wealthiest agricultural countries in Europe. They supply, between them and Russia, they supply pretty well the whole pretty well Western Europe to all the grains, mostly wheat, barley, oil. That's been a major disruption to the world. It doesn't affect us too much. The only thing it really helps us with is price of grain's gone up. Like grain prices usually in April, May are pretty, for fall cash price crop is pretty low because, we're going into a lot of uncertainty. We might have some big crops, but yeah, $23 bushel canola right now for fall delivery, $14 wheat. Usually those are half going into a new crop year. So, you hate to see what's going on, but if we get some rain, these farmers can make some pretty serious money this year in Canada and the US.
Yeah, and I wrote a column on it recently, and it's of something of big concern. A recent report from the federal government, they haven't implemented anything yet, but it looks like they're moving towards cracking down on the use of chemical fertilizers in the future because the emissions it could cause. That could be extremely, make a very large impact on crop yields and ability for farmers at this point. What's the agricultural community think of this as they're hearing about it?
Well, you know what? Obviously, we probably put more fertilizer on now than we ever have, and because fertilizer equates to bigger yields. But we just talked here 2 minutes ago. The world's grain supply is very low due to not so much the war, but we had a pretty wicked year last year for drought. There's just no grain out there. I don't know what they're defining 30% reduction on. What is I don't know where they're getting their numbers. How are they going to enforce that? How do they know what 100% of normal is? But yeah, if this goes through, I don't know. Number one, I don't even know how they do it. And two, if they do figure out a way to reduce synthetic fertilizers by 30%, it's quite obvious we're going to be reducing our yields. I don't know how. And with weather events, it could just make things much worse. But fertilizer grows crops, and that's why we use them.
Yeah, I mean, it's just stands to reason. I mean, people know that on a micro scale with their own gardens and such, but when we get onto a larger scale with commercial agriculture, I mean, it's just essential. I mean, if you were forced, I mean, how does that formula kind of work? You know, just if say there was a shortage of fertilizer, just whatever, if you cut back by the amount you applied by 30% in 1 year, what sort of impact would that have on the yield? You know, that fall potentially.
You know, that's a good question, Cory. I really don't know that. I would I would look at it the way they're cutting it. If you know, if you're taking 30% of actual nitrogen and phosphate, most of it's nitrogen. It's the phosphate. When we're talking fertilizers, their biggest concern is probably on nitrogen output. I would assume 30% reduction is going to probably result in 30% reduction of crop yield. So that's a pretty big number. And when you've got $14 wheat and $10 barley by the bushels in a grain shortage, you just added 30% more grain shortage. And I could be wrong with that, but you know, just from how I see it would be delivered, that's kind of what I see would happen. If you reduce 30% of your fertilizer, yeah, you're definitely going to have probably a 20 to 30 to 40% reduction in crop yields. So.
Yeah, well, I just wanted, you know, to bring that up and talk to people about it so they understand, you know, the threat and what's going on. It seems this government is just so ideologically driven. They identify something and they say we got to get rid of this, we got to get rid of this, but they don't develop the alternative before they bring in the legislation. I mean, we're seeing that with petrochemical production and things like that. They're saying we've got to cut back the use of it by this and this, but they haven't come up with the alternative yet. So all we're going to do is damage ourselves, and the costs go through the roof for everybody.
You know, the biggest thing I've seen, you know, and I'm not going to beat up provincial or federal government, but over the last 10, 15 years, there's been a huge disconnect of grassroots knowledge at the federal level. I don't even know what we have for federal government employees in Ag Canada out of Lethbridge. You never see these guys. I don't know where they're getting their information from, but I'll tell you, they're not visiting the farms. And I think there's such a disconnect with agriculture nowadays that they don't have a clue. I don't even know how they're going to do this. It's getting worse. You know, we used to have a lot of involvement with the feds on some good programs, and they've axed them all. And you know, agriculture really is an afterthought when it comes to, especially the Liberal government. You know, we're out west. You know, and I know I'm sounding like a true typical Westerner, but we get nothing from the feds for anything in ag. We haven't for the last 10 years, anyways.
Yeah, well, that's an unfortunate thing. I don't want to pull you too far into the political weeds. I brought you in more for the agricultural aspect, but I think some of it's an evolution of just, and I don't know how to fix it necessarily. You know, even if the Liberals wanted to bring in more agriculturally skilled members of Parliament on committees and issues or in cabinet, they don't have a lot to draw from because they just aren't terribly popular in agriculturally producing ridings. That's just not where the Liberals have their strength. And it leads to a weakness in policy, but we're all paying that price for it.
Well, you know, the worst thing about this 30% synthetic fertilizer reduction is I don't think people realize that agriculture, we've gone to a no-till farming system. So all our crops are direct seeded. We're not exposing soil. Agriculture, no-till farming is one of the biggest carbon sequestration. Like, we suck in so much carbon from not disturbing the soil, like our crops, you know. So then they turn around and say, well, we're going to cut you 30% of your fertilizer. Those crops, when they're growing and we're not disturbing the soil and working them up and releasing carbon, is a major carbon sink. And yeah, it's just a head scratcher, that's for sure, Cory.
Yeah, so getting further, I mean, this has been a challenge for every industry on the planet, and particularly in North America. I mean, the term, we know, most people had never even mentioned supply chains 3 years ago, and we're all much more aware of, at least to a degree, of what's happening with them. How are things looking with rail? I mean, rail is very important in the agricultural community. There's always been challenges. When the oil prices go high, suddenly the rail companies are filling up with all the chemical cars, and sometimes needs for agricultural things get set aside. Are things looking all right on the rail front, or I honestly don't know?
Yeah, you know, what was that, about a month ago? CP Rail had that strike, you know, where the union guys were gonna go on strike. That lasted one day, thankfully, because I think the last time we talked, there's not a lot of feed grains in our province right now. We're getting down to feedlot alley, so a lot of corn was coming up, and distiller corn grain, the end product from ethanol, was coming up via rail, and a lot of these feedlots were in a real jackpot if that rail line stopped. Thankfully, that only lasted a day, but from what I've heard, I think it's smooth sailing. There's not a lot of grain to be heading to ports right now. I don't think a lot, typical amount, but I'm sure it's below typical that's heading to Vancouver. But things are good on the rail front. Haven't heard any hiccups. So.
Well, that's at least one thing that's good. One less headache that could potentially come. Again, I mean, everybody's worried about inflation. That's the thing, and it's a reality. And if we could try to address some of these factors, there's only so much we could do with world markets, but there are domestic things we can do to quit kicking ourselves in the shins with these things, it seems. Getting perhaps a little into the cattle producers, that's another area that seems to be sensitive. They're always having a hard time, and I know there's a lot of policy challenges going on there between processors and distributors and the producers themselves. How are things looking on that front? I know hay has gone through the roof lately, and that has an impact that some people don't necessarily realize as well until they see the price at the store for a steak.
Yeah, I know. Some positive out of this. It was a pretty good calving season. We didn't have a super cold winter. Most of these guys start calving late February, full on March and April. So good calving season. There's optimism out there. I think the cattle markets are, guys, it definitely hasn't gone up like the grain commodities, but yeah, the big thing is feeding these cows, and you alluded to that. Hay stocks are low. I think there's a lot of guys breathing a little easier north of Calgary. That snow. These late winters really help set up pastures and hayland. But when you get south of Calgary, some of these guys out in the East Country, Brooks, Lomond country, a lot of guys rely on native. We've got a lot of crown land out east that the province has in some of the counties. And boy, the grass looks pretty rough out there. Dugouts are empty. There was no runoff. So feeding these cows is going to be tough this year, but it's early. I think most guys are optimistic. If we could get some rain's going to be critical for the cattle guys here, probably in the next week to 2 weeks. If we can get a little bit just to keep things growing, but yeah, feeding issues and summer grazing is going to be really tough south. Calgary north, I think that snow did a lot for them, but yeah, tough year to be in cattle if you got to feed them this south of Calgary.
Yeah, well, it's always been the nature of agriculture production is that all you can do to a degree is cross your fingers and hope for good weather. Sometimes it's your friend, sometimes it's your enemy. In areas of policy, before I let you go in these last few minutes, though, what are some areas you think we can address? What are areas we can do to make things better for producers and, of course, consumers in the end?
Ooh, that's a tough question, Cory. I think like the grain farmer, it's this COVID thing has really made no man's land for inputs. Input shortages like herbicide. This Ukraine war has really jumped, stuff like fertilizer. So there's been a real scare on inputs. I don't know what kind of policies could be changed to yeah, that's a good question. Cattle guys would probably like to see some assistance on, if they could bring back some of these. Yeah, I don't know. You caught me off guard. I don't.
That's okay.
I don't really think there's much. The money's there. The guys are making money. The government can't make it rain. It's just, yeah. I just don't know how to answer that.
Sure. Well, I'm kind of wondering a little bit, like when it comes to, say, producer to consumer, though, I see a lot of complaints because we've got very, very few meat processors. I mean, on a large scale. Is there perhaps deregulation you think could be done, or things that might encourage a little more local processing on a smaller? I have bought a couple of steers over the last few years. We live in Prentice, we know some producers, but I don't save anything going that route. It helps bypass the processing a little and get more money direct to the producer that way. But you think maybe there's ways we could allow a little more innovation in production or bringing those things to market?
Oh, for sure. Like, the cattle guys, the feeder guys are always at the mercy of basically two packing plants. That's Brooks and High River. If you can support your local butchers, that's great. I know it's really hard, very costly, a lot of regulations. Some of these guys have tried over the years, like that up at Balzac, they were trying to get another packing plant started. So yeah, and that's a world I don't know a lot about, but I know there's a lot of regulations, a lot of red tape, but packing capacity the meat plants here is definitely a bottleneck for our cattle producers. And we're at the mercy of basically two companies. So that's a good point, Cory. There could be a lot of work done on the end use of getting these cattle processed for market. The grocery prices, carbon tax going up. Yeah, there's a lot I see where you're going with that. There's a lots of things the government could be doing, reducing maybe the carbon tax on getting this stuff to market. That's a lot of that's being passed on to our consumers in the grocery stores. Food prices are insane, and grain shortages are there. The cattle are lower, but the cattle are still there. Why is meat prices so high? There's a lot that the government could be doing to lower these great food prices.
Yeah, well, hopefully we get some more pragmatic action. I mean, when consumers are getting it in the pocketbook, that's when they suddenly pay attention. You can scream from the wilderness, but if people are getting good prices, they don't necessarily watch the issues that closely. Right now, they don't have a choice when they're realizing, holy cow, when I go to the store and fill up my grocery cart for a couple $100, there's not as much in that cart as there used to be. So sometimes, though, the hard times can spawn some creativity and we'll make some advancements. So I appreciate you checking in with us today, though. It's such a big issue we just don't talk enough about in the West. It's a big part of our economy, and there's a lot of guys like you out there producing, and I just want to keep our viewers up to date on what's happening down there.
Yeah, it's like I say, hopefully it'd be nice just to have a normal year. Hopefully we can get some rain. That heat snap last year, I hope that doesn't come back to and it'd be nice just to see some regularity. Like I say, going to a grocery store right now and trying to get produce up from the States, it's tough. It's going to be tough, and it's going to get tougher. That carbon tax is just killing people at the grocery store. Supply management. I know you did a great talk the other day on that. I enjoyed that. They're sure setting their rates up pretty high too, and boy, it's tough to feed a family right now.
Yeah, no, I was going to keep you clear of the supply management issues. Like I said earlier in the show, every time I touch that, my email inbox just gets slammed by dairy producers who get upset with me, but I'll keep you out of that fight.
That sounds good.
But okay, well, no, I appreciate you coming on today, Kelly. It's always good to talk to you. Like I said, we need that viewpoint. We get too urban-centric sometimes and forget where our food comes from. So I like to remind everybody where it is at and just see what's happening down there. So I hope we can talk again sometime soon, maybe a little later in the season.
Yeah, let's catch up about June. June will probably be about mid-June. We'll kind of see where we're at for this year. Hopefully we got some grain in the bin and price of bread goes down and meat goes down. But yeah, let's talk in a couple months. We'll give you an update.
Right on. Yeah, maybe we'll be celebrating what looks to be a good season coming up. As you said, we're due for just a good one for a change.
You bet.
All right. Well, thank you. So that was Kelly Malmberg. As I said, he's been on before. He's a producer in southern Alberta there, and just getting that nuanced voice. I live in a rural area, but I can't pretend to be a farmer. And, I can see some of those frustrations we get as consumers, things like that. Like when I stand on my patio, literally, quite often I can hear cattle in the distance from neighboring fields. They're lowing away and making a noise. Yet I go to Superstore and a cheap old rubbery blade steak is costing me $9 or something. Like, why is it that I'm in the heart of cattle country and I can't get a good price on meat? But it's everything. Everything is on the rise terribly. And as Kelly said, some of it, well, it's just a matter of the weather. There's only so much you can do. They've had a hard time when you got to feed those cattle. Hay is expensive. The price gets passed down to you. But there's other things that I think we can do. As he was saying, the carbon tax, it adds. I mean, these are fuel-intensive industries. These farmers, they get some credits on the carbon tax. I understand that, but there's all sorts of other areas of input. Their grain dryers, or as you're saying, the stuff that gets brought up in wintertime. It's funny, some of the irony of most of our hipsters and leftists who scream about cracking down on for carbon taxes and things like that. Yet they're the ones who are vegetarians who want to make sure they get all those fresh greens and everything in January in Canada. Well, guess what, guys? They get trucked up here. And that burns a whole lot of diesel, and that is what your carbon tax is hitting. So don't whine about your expensive avocados in February. It's your own fault for pulling that sort of stuff on. And it puts pressure on imported stuff, and it puts pressure on domestic stuff. But as we said, hopefully we get a decent year. And it is scary with that ridiculousness, though, of the government talking about making them reduce fertilizer by 30%. I wrote a column on that. It's on the Western Standard. I broke down some of the numbers because fertilizer advancements are one of the biggest advancements we've had in making such large crops that we're feeding everybody. I mean, when you relied on old school fertilizing and crop rotation and things like that, and again, I'm not a massive expert, but from what I could read on it, it limited your ability to produce so much stuff per acre. And chemical fertilizers, modern ones, they have dramatically increased what can be done on a plot of land. And of course, it brings things into affordability. It brings us surplus food that we can share with the rest of the world and leave it to our idiotic federal government to actually go after that advancement we have and try and cut it down. It's actually quite distressing. So let's see here. We got, I'll speak quickly again, and we've touched some digital currencies and some other things too. I'll hit Bitcoin Well one more time because they're a great sponsor and it's what I want to talk about twice a day and it's important. But Bitcoin Well, somebody else was asking who owns it. They're a publicly traded company, though I believe they got a fair amount of transparency and information about their directors and the board and so on. Like, they aren't a company, Bitcoin Well isn't a company that holds on to your Bitcoin at any time or your money. As they say it on their site, it's non-custodial. And that's what keeps you safe. You see, there's a lot of the ripoffs out there. There's a lot of the scams, and that's what people worry about. And they should. You work hard for your money. It just seems like there's always somebody trying to steal it from you one way or another, including the government. That's part of why I like the idea of digital currencies. Bitcoin Well is just there to facilitate getting you connected with Bitcoin, assuming that's for you. They lead you through the process. They are great for answering questions. As I said, it's one-on-one. You're not talking to a call center across the planet. You're not talking to a little chat window that pops up when you go on your website. You can sit face-to-face with a real person and discuss these things, not even just on a Zoom meeting. We're talking white glove personal service. They got ATMs all across the country. Like, this is a well-established local digital currency company, bitcoinwell.com. Check them out because, I see a lot of, and I appreciate that. I appreciate those questions coming through the comment scroll because I'm familiar with them, of course, and we're taking part in that with our payroll program here at the Western Standard. Actually, a portion of our check gets voluntarily put into a Bitcoin account, and Western Standard matches it. We get a nice little savings off to the side. And but there's still, I'm not an expert in all those things. That's what they're about. And if you got questions, get on there, bitcoinwell.com, ask them. They're very responsive. That's what they're about. They will answer those questions and find out if it is indeed for you. Okay, let's see. Let's look into, again, we were talking about accountability and ripoffs and lack of trust with the government. Here's a beauty. The Canada Revenue Agency, everybody's friend, paid $500,000 in rent subsidies to a phantom company that had no leases and never filed a tax return. Like, how the hell does this happen? How is it that if you file your return and you're $500 short on your taxes, somehow the CRA becomes incredibly efficient? They will almost beat your door down to get that $500 and beat the crap out of you with extra charges and interest, but they can't track $500,000 that they paid out to a company that didn't even file a return. Well, you know how it happened. It's corruption. We got fraud going on, guys, somewhere in there. So, this is your money. This is the money you work hard for, and this is what our government does with it. These are the clowns that manage it. Again, they can't even get their bloody payroll system right. And this happens on a lot of levels. We got more corruption in Canada than people realize. People envision developing countries, third world countries, where you got to bribe your way around, and it's very direct. It's very in the open with the actual corruption with government officials. Ours is a little more underground, but it still happens. There's a big question I've had for a lot of years about a group called Civic Camp. It was a municipal lobby group that if people know the history of it and everything else, it was basically Nenchi's little pet lobby group. We can't prove it because that group had no name. It had no directors. It had no president, no treasurer, no bank account. Yet they were giving budgetary presentations to the city of Calgary. They got a $5,000 grant from the Calgary Foundation, but they don't exist. They had no people. How did this City of Calgary Charitable Foundation give $5,000 to a group that doesn't exist on paper? And I know this because for people who know me and know the history, I registered that company as a nonprofit myself. And I was the president of Civic Camp. And Nenchi's eyes almost popped out of his bloody head when it happened. This was if you Google it, Cory Morgan Civic Camp, you'll see the media mainstream came after me hard for that. But what I did was blew up a shell organization, a sham organization, and registered it. But how are they getting money? This happens right in front of our faces. The government tracks every nickel you've got, yet somehow they take that money and they can give it out to completely unregistered organizations with no names attached to them. It's happening on every level of government. These are just the ones we hear about. These are the ones that we find out about. This is scary stuff, guys. No wonder the government can't balance its bloody budget, eh? So, yeah, it looks like the records show the agency took only weeks to pay more than $480,000 in subsidies to this applicant. Wow, that's pretty fast. Again, they don't do anything in less than months when we have to deal with them. There should be a criminal investigation when these things start to happen. It really should. Here's another story that got some people good and wound up recently. Is a Florida sheriff urging homeowners to shoot intruders as it could save taxpayers money. It says if someone's breaking into your house, you're more than welcome to shoot them in Santa Rosa County. We prefer that you do, actually, said County Sheriff Bob Johnston at a press conference as he spoke to the public. He was addressing an unidentified homeowner who shot at a home invader. And this was a career loser. Brandon Harris was his name. He had 17 prior arrests. And he's basically saying, when we get these guys coming and going 17 times, it's pretty expensive for the taxpayer. It's putting people at risk. Maybe if they're breaking into your house, you should just blow their brains out. Now, I'm not recommending that advice here in Alberta, but I'm saying it's a change of attitude that probably is welcome on a number of levels. We do need castle doctrine. We need the ability to protect ourselves. Here's where the evolution, I think, of a lot of things have got to go. They really do. And it's funny when I fight on social media with the defund the police crackpots, and there's a lot of them. One of the things I say, fine, is defund them. No problem. As a libertarian, I can live with that. But I'm going to get together with my neighbors, and we should be able then to pool our money and get our own private police force for just our neighborhood. Fair enough, isn't it? If we defund the police, I want the tax break. It's my money. I'm not getting police for it. I want the money in my pocket. And then I can get together with my neighbors and we'll put it out there. And let's change the laws. Let's put the responsibility on me then and my neighbors themselves and say, I can protect my property. And we theoretically have those rights to protect our property. But when we do, you get dragged through the judicial system. They make the process into the punishment. We saw that a while back with Eddie Maurice. I was very active in getting support, for the protests and things like that outside of the courtroom. Eddie Maurice was a young man out in Okotoks area. People might remember him. He had a chronic loser, a pair of them actually. They both had long criminal records. He didn't know that at the time, of course. All he knew is it's 5 a.m. He's on a rural property, and there's people breaking into his place. And he's got his baby in the house. Eddie was the only person home, so he's the only defense between these criminals on his property and the baby in his house. And he fired some warning shots. And, people asked a lot of questions. I might as well expand on that. And there's a video out there on Western Standard. I went to Eddie's house and chatted with him, and we did some things following up. And we got some good pictures showing. Because people say, well, why didn't he fire the shots in the air? Because you see, one of the intruders got hit in the elbow by a ricochet. Why didn't you shoot in the air? Well, he had a porch that was overhanging, and he was at his front door. If he'd done that, he would have shoot holes through his own roof. So he shot in the ground. And he showed me where this homebreaker was. This guy was on his front steps. And again, that video, that interview I did with him, you can see that. This guy was like 16 feet away from him. Who wouldn't shoot? What kind of parent in that circumstance wouldn't shoot? Eddie showed quite the control, in my view, in not shooting the guy in the head. And it was only a 22. This guy, this loser, this meth head, was lucky on a lot of levels. But what happened? Well, Eddie called the police. Of course, these guys ran off after this guy got hit in the elbow, the two of them. The police suddenly arrived, they arrived like a couple hours later. And Eddie wanted them to arrive suddenly. He had people, breaking onto his property, but they didn't take it seriously until the loser who was trying to rob him checked himself into the hospital with an elbow injury and said, yes, I got shot. Then the police arrived with the TAC team, arrested Eddie, threw him in jail, charged him with a pile of charges. It took months to get through that. Week after week, he was in and out of court. The prosecutor would keep kicking the can down the road. He'd keep saying, we need 2 more weeks. We need 2 more weeks. Eddie's life was on hold. He was put through misery. His wife was put through misery. Everybody, family members. And you know what the prosecutors were waiting for, though? Every time he went to court, every 2 weeks, there were hundreds of us outside that courtroom protesting in favor of Eddie, supporting him. The media was there. Rick Bell was there all the time, all sorts of people. They were hoping for it to cool down so they could prosecute this young man on the down low, because they hate seeing us defending ourselves. But they realized that the hype wasn't going away. They realized Eddie was going to go to jury, and there was no way that citizens, his fellow citizens, were going to convict him on this. So they quietly dropped the charges. They said, well, it was a ricochet. It was unintentional. We're going to let him go. But they put him through hell for months in that. That shows the attitude in Canada. That has to change. I live in a rural property too, the same county as Eddie does. The average police response time in my area is 40 minutes. And I'm not faulting the police officers for it. They've only got so much for resources, okay? The detachment for my area is down in Turner Valley. Even if they're coming straight from Turner to my house, it'd be 20 minutes at the least. If they happen to be patrolling the south end in the night, because often there's only one cop on for the whole county, it could be 40 minutes, could be an hour. In that case, I should be fully within my rights to defend myself. I shouldn't be afraid, and I'll tell you what, I'm not afraid. If it came to defending my household and keeping my family safe, I'm not going to worry about what the courts are going to do to me. I'll deal with whatever the risk is being presented to my family first, and I'll deal with the courts afterwards. But I shouldn't have to worry about that. And we had a lot of those discussions during that period when Eddie was in and out of courts. There were huge town hall meetings. That's part of what got the prosecutors all nervous too. RCMP came out. I remember one in Pritis that we had, and every time somebody asked the officer, because all the RCMP were allowed to say is, if you've got a homebreaker, all you can do is call, cower, and pray. That's the term I use for it. You can go in your house, curl up in a corner, call the police, and hope they get there in time to save you from whatever this person coming into your house wants to do. Hopefully they just want to steal your stuff, not rape you or murder you or torture you, as some crazed criminals are occasionally prone to doing. One guy said, well, what if I shot their vehicle with a paintball gun at least when they're fleeing so we could identify them better? Is you'd be charged with discharge of a firearm, criminal discharge of a firearm. He says, well, it's not even a firearm. Yeah, but if they think it's a firearm, it'll be considered a firearm. It's just lunacy. Somebody said, what if I pepper spray them? What if I sick my dog on them? Every question a person made the police said, we will charge you. You are not allowed to defend yourself in any sort of way. You will be eventually when you get to a jury, as we saw with the Colton Bushy case, as we saw with Kessler many years ago in Alberta, if you want to look that up, and we saw with Eddie Maurice. But the state hates giving you that ability to protect yourself, and they will punish you as hard as they can when you try to. And it's got to stop. You know what? These losers, these chronics, they know that. That's why they do it over and over again. They're not afraid of you. They should be afraid of you. They really should. Rural properties are getting hit a lot. You know, traditionally they weren't in the past. Why were they not hit a lot in the past? Because we used to respect the ability to defend your property and yourself. And criminals were smart enough, at least, not that they're typically smart, but they're smart enough to realize I'm going to get my brains blown out if I break into that rural property, so I'll go mess around somewhere else. And we need to bring some of that attitude back. So yes, everybody's all wound up over that sheriff in Florida saying that you should be able to shoot these guys. Well, I'm all with them, guys. I'm with them. You know, there's an easy way to avoid getting shot. Don't break into places. Holy crap. Wow, what a wonder, eh? Crazy concept, personal responsibility. Just don't do it. I have had 100% success rate in not being shot through choosing not to rob people. Lo and behold, eh? So no, big white tear of sympathy running down my leg for home breakers and criminals who break into people's places and get shot. Sorry, guys, that is suicide, not an assault. All right, let's see some of the other good news out there in Canada right now. Oh yeah, we set a new record for anti-Semitic incidents in Canada for the 6th consecutive year. It's funny when we hear about, you know, racism and hate crimes and hate speech and many other things. This part you don't hear about a lot. You don't hear a lot about the anti-Semitic issue. Well, why do we not hear about these so much? Well, part of the problem is a lot of these incidents happened during protests that were going on. There were anti-Israel rallies going on during the Hamas-Israel conflict. And on one of them, there was 250 recorded incidents. People holding Israeli flags were beaten and hospitalized with serious injuries. Well, they don't want to talk about that because this is getting a little more delicate, because now we're talking about, well, yes, but the people attacking them were also minority. And when we start on the hierarchy of victimhood, now it gets dicey and complicated. So we'll just kind of leave that out of our hate crime concerns. Well, this is setting the record year after year after year. If you really want to get on the hate crimes, maybe we should start looking a little broadly. Part of the problem is, of course, not every Jew is a visibly identifiable minority. Not always going to be wearing the kippah, you know, and they don't necessarily look Jewish. So often they will look white, and we don't want to talk about prejudices in that end. It takes away from that narrative of somehow it's this white supremacist world that's trying to beat everybody down. We have real issues happening. They're happening all over. And there are white supremacists. Probably 1 in 100,000 people might be white supremacists. That's still one too many, but all the same. It's not some overwhelming thing. The world's not getting taken over by them. We got to take all of these things seriously. And if they're going to prioritize hate crimes, they shouldn't be prioritizing. They should be looking at them all and taking them all very seriously and looking at them. But somehow the anti-Semitic stuff tends to fall by the wayside. Strange that. All right, I'm going to wrap things up. Now, tomorrow I got Drew Barnes on the show. He's the MLA for Medicine Hat, independent one, and we're going to talk about his motion coming before the legislature soon on the Alberta agenda and things such as that. And our BC reporter, Reid Small, is going to check in and give us an update on things happening out in British Columbia. So thank you all for tuning in today, guys, and I will see you tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. sharp.